Okay, I guess we'll get started. So if you want to start, Seth.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. My name is Seth Yund. I'm currently an air pollution specialist at the Air Resources Board, but I'm also the director of public recruitment for an organization called NxtGov. Overall, NxtGov is really focused on kind of changing state government, including like actual state level government and local government culture, to be more collaborative, for a whole host of different reasons. Reduced duplicative efforts, kind of utilize the creativity that exists across different agencies and create a more harmonious, more effective government. My role is, as director of public recruitment, is really to help facilitate pathways into state and local service. And historically, my background is in state service, so that's kind of my level area of expertise. And so that's what I'll be talking about today, is really what is the process of getting into state government, what are all the steps along the way, and then some tips and tricks about how to do it best. So with that, cue the presentation, I guess.
Okay.
And feel free to ask questions along the way. I'm not exactly sure how they'll pop up on the screen.
You can either chat the questions, or you can, if you are through phone or through your computer,
sure,
voice that.
And excellent. That
I don't know which screen they're seeing.
They'll be seeing, we have a split screen right now between presenters view and presented view, so we're ironing that out. I'm going to assume that they're seeing presented view. So either way, you should be seeing a screen that says demystifying state jobs. And to really kind of get things started, this is a little bit outdated, but this is an organizational chart for the entire state executive branch. And you can tell it's outdated because at the top it says Governor Jerry Brown. Obviously, we have a new governor. But the main takeaway that I want to show from this is the state is huge. It's really massive. And with respect to navigating it, that can be slightly intimidating. To flip the script a little bit and reframe it, the way that I see the state is a place that's got so many different pockets for so many different types of passions that also, generally speaking, requires collaborative activity, so that if you have anything from a really deep passion in a specific thing to a broad passion across many different things, you can really find a place here to take advantage of and foster that passion. And when you're trying to navigate this ocean of opportunity, really using your passion as a guide, using it as a compass to say, okay, I'm really into, whoa, what just happened?
Sorry, there's the other screen.
Okay, sorry. Using your passion as a guide to say, okay, I'm interested in environmentalism, okay, I'm interested in energy, social equity, this, that, the other thing. Really knowing what makes you tick can help you go through all of these opportunities and find a place that'll really, really stick with you. And so over the course of this presentation, I kind of really challenge you to think about what is your passion and how can you find it within this framework. Now, the way that I found my passion really started out with kind of a quarter life crisis at the very end of college. I did a lot of research to attain my biological sciences degree, and I hadn't taken any governance classes or really I had thought about politics as something that was frustrating from the outside, and policy is something that really did make a difference, but didn't necessarily run on science, which was my passion. And so I wanted to produce the best science I could to inform policy. Over time, however, when I kept turning on the news, I kept on hearing these debates that were just so far, so distant from the scientific reality that I was living in as an undergrad, that I decided to kind of flip my career path from biological research to policy advocacy, really understand how data drives decision making. And so I went into the Executive Fellowships program under the Capital Fellows program, got placed in the Delta Stewardship Council, which is, I think a recent headline described it as this obscure agency may sink the Delta tunnels, if you're familiar with that project. It was a very small agency, but a very powerful and circumstantially powerful and very interesting place to work for that fellowship time. And now I work for the Air Resources Board on climate policy, essentially using the back end of cap and trade, their auction proceeds to and see how all of the auction proceeds money go into different climate investment programs across the state. And so it's been a really fascinating ride and something I did not see coming 3 years ago, but I'm really happy that I landed here. And so the process through which I didn't just describe, however, was the HR side of things, the administrative side of things. How did I actually, once I got out of the fellowship, I obviously needed a job. How did I get that job? And so on the left side of the screen, you can kind of see these are the general steps that it takes to really navigate that HR side of things. And really it all centers around, for the state level, local government is a different story, but I'm going to talk about what I know most well. It kind of centers around this portal called CalCareers. CalCareers has gotten a lot better in recent years, but there are still some complaints. However, I think it's improved quite a bit. And you can really filter down what opportunities you want to see. These all public service opportunities at the state level are required to be featured here, with the exception of a few appointee positions. So this is a really, really good place to start and stay and keep working at. So the very first step in this is create your CalCareers account, familiarize yourself with the CalCareers website so that you can start kind of using these different knobs to really start looking for where you might be passionate. And that'll help you quite a bit. Of course, the next step really is selecting, again, computer, something just happened.
Oh, that's weird.
Well, the next step is really understanding, looking for positions. But before you can really look for positions, you have to look for what are called classifications. Multiple positions oftentimes have the same classification, and the classification is essentially a set of requirements that you have to meet to be able to apply for certain kinds of positions. To give an example, if you are interested in being an environmental scientist, if you're interested in applying for environmental scientist positions, you'll have to get the environmental science classification. Once you get the ES classification, you can then start applying for jobs at Department of Fish and Wildlife that have specific names, like I honestly, there's ex-technician or like water policy analyst, or really the classification stems into a lot of different types of positions. Once you identify which classifications, to back up a little bit more. So there's a ton of classifications that you can really pick from, and they kind of range from the classifications that have a lot of different types of positions associated with them. I highlighted the staff services analyst position because that's what I'm going to be using as an example for the rest of this discussion. But then there's also classifications like mine, which is an air pollution specialist, where the only type of position that you can get from that is an air pollution specialist position. And appropriately, those are called specialist positions. And so things like on the far left, like you can see air resources engineer, you can see disability evaluation analyst, you can see in the middle, you can see engineer water resources. Those are considered more specialist positions, whereas staff services analyst, associate governmental program analyst, I'm not sure where that lives on this page, and environmental scientist even, in some ways, are kind of more generalist classifications. So for the rest of this discussion, because so many opportunities exist within staff services analyst, and because staff services analyst is really a great entry-level classification for people with a 4 years bachelor's degree, I'm going to continue to talk as if this is the classification that we're working through. Every classification requires that you take an exam. And while different classifications have different suites of exams, generally speaking, exams, there will always be a certain type of exam. Now, to, again, use the staff services analyst or SSA position, the SSA requires one exam, and the exam itself is it's not a do you know X and do you know Y, it's more of a how many times have you X'd and how many times have you Y'd. It really goes to test your experience rather than your expertise. And to kind of really describe what they're looking for in these things, they're trying to look for they're trying to give you an avenue through which you can translate your experience, which may or may not actually be specifically relevant to the policy field. Remember, all I had done before getting here was biological research, and translate it through an exam, and this is true of the application as well. Translate it through the exam to show that to demonstrate that you are capable of doing certain kinds of tasks that are relevant to this job at hand. It's also, I forgot the slide was here, but so really the steps in this process are search for the classification, check that you meet the minimum qualifications of that classification. SSA requires a 4-year bachelor's degree. Environmental science requires a 4-year bachelor's degree in a scientific field. And then, of course, passing the exam. So a lot of these questions are kind of outdated. The exams themselves oftentimes were made years and years and years ago. And so I wanted to provide an example question that kind of highlights this point, that not all exam questions are really pertinent. So the question here is, using word processing software. So essentially is, do you have experience in before each of these example questions? So do you have experience in using word processing software to develop formats? I think everybody on this webinar should probably answer, I am technically proficient to the point where I can perform this task independently. This was written in an era where email was the hot new thing. And so there are a lot of questions like this, and really don't second guess yourself on these types of questions. This exam is made to be passed. And to kind of give a counterexample though, there are often times where questions are slightly more ambiguous. So for example, do you have experience in developing an alternate work plan due to setbacks or challenging priorities to allow completion of a project on a time or within budget? So to translate that a little bit, have you ever had a plan? Have you ever had that plan, have you ever had that plan have to change? And then have you ever implemented that change plan? Again, it's incredibly ambiguous. You can shape your experience to the question. And really, you want to present yourself in this and in the interview and in the application. You want to present your best self here. The exam itself is a filter. You need about 90 to 95% to pass, which is frustrating but true. And you only get that other 5% if you're a veteran. It's a carve out. And so I recommend, because it's not timed, because it's online, taking your resume, taking the exam, going through and saying, okay, I'm not sure if I'm a B or an A on this one. A being the best score you could get, going through your resume until you think you can justify answering A. And then if you can, answer A. It really, you want to be as generous with yourself as possible on this, because it is a filter that doesn't necessarily indicate how well you will do in the position a lot of times. So to close out the exam portion, really, there are lots of other exams that are associated with different kinds of classifications. For a financial analyst of the Department of Finance, you are also required to take a writing and a math test in addition to this experiential exam. So be sure that you look at that when you're looking at the specific classification descriptions and the position descriptions as well, just to know and keep track of what the requirements are and what the process is. So once you've taken the exam and you have set classifications that will allow you to apply for positions, now is the time to really start your search and find positions that are really going to meet your passion. I think this is a little bit individual. Everybody's got their own method. My method, which is kind of shown here, might be a little bit overkill. So just to describe how I went about doing it, I had a color coding scheme where I really liked the jobs. I didn't, and then all the way down to like, if I desperately need a job, I would apply to this and I'd probably get it. And so these are the agency that I'd be working with, the job title, essentially the job code, and then the deadline for application. And then I ranked them based on classification. I ranked them based on my desire to actually do the job. So in addition to tracking classifications, I also track agencies. You can see that I created links on the side of these different agencies. These links took me directly to all of the classifications that a particular agency was hiring for on the CalCareers site. this is a good way to find classifications that you might not be considering, but that you might be qualified for. If you know you really want to work at the Department of Food and Ag, but you don't know in what capacity, just keep track of what jobs they're posting. And it was only kind of after the fact, or like 3/4 of the way in, that I learned you can set up these automatic notifications on CalCareers when I first did this, which probably would have saved me a lot of time in terms of scanning for all of these things. But I really found this particular process to be useful. You can set up your own, you can set up your accounts, your own account, so that you get these notifications for particular types of jobs. And that might be a better way to go for you. Again, whatever works best for you is the best way to go. And again, now we kind of get back to the CalCareers knobs. There's a lot of different strategies. For turning these knobs, I highly recommend, again, figuring out the one that works best for you. You can search in job categories. If I point, I don't know if you'll see me, but it's right there. Job categories often help you kind of explore fields or areas or agencies that you might be interested but don't know about. Classifications, I think we've talked quite a lot about that. Location might be really important to you. I was only looking for jobs in Sacramento County, so that was a pretty big starting filter for me. And of course, going through everything there. If you have a certain minimum salary you need, then you can dial that up as well. So I think I still have, yeah, okay, doing well on time. So I wanted to go over what it actually looks like to fill out the application. Now, the application itself is primarily, if you're doing it online, it's pretty straightforward. There's a form that's named STD 617. If you are interested in filling that out and mailing it to your specific agencies, you're going to have to go through a slightly different process that just requires printing it out and filling out the blanks via pencil or on your desktop or whatever. But if you use CalCareers, it's actually slightly, I think, easier because you can fill in all your information like you would via a standard online application, and it asks for typical things like work experience, references. Sorry, that just went blank. References, and then at the very end, things like the statement of qualifications, which is somewhat in front of you. So the statement of qualifications is essentially a cover letter with specific instructions. Oftentimes they have a link at the very bottom that says, this is the prompt for the statement of qualifications. I chose this example because they don't actually have that. And I think not only is this an interesting job that I would potentially apply for, when that is the case, the statement of qualification prompt becomes the job description and duties. And then you essentially flip that over into how well would I qualify and what attributes would help me achieve the duties in this particular job description. So when writing the statement of qualifications, sorry, I'm having some trouble. There's a window blocking some of the words. Okay. This is a little bit this is a little bit of a bureaucratic quick tip, but try and use as much of the language that they have in these particular statements as possible. To the point of, I know at this point, plagiarism is probably burned into your mind as a bad thing, but really, really kind of copy and pasting and then customizing these sentences is the best way to go about it. So if I were to apply to this particular position, I would take essentially the second sentence. The SSA gathers, analyzes, maintains general information, researches, and makes recommendations to management relating to legislatively mandated registration program. I would add an S, or at least change the grammar. Oh, to the legislatively mandated registration program. My apologies. Oh, excellent. It's much larger on the screen. I would essentially say, I have gathered, analyzed, maintained general information, researched, and made recommendations on X, Y, and Z program when I was working for the Delta Stewardship Council or something like that. And then I would give examples as to why. Somebody who's not necessarily familiar with this position will be processing your application most likely in the agency's particular HR department. And so it's really key to kind of shout out your qualifications from the rooftops. If this is what they're using as a benchmark to assess whether or not you are qualified, make it clear that you use this when you're writing your statement of qualifications, and in a way that's really easy for them to follow. If you want to express, it's not a creative process, to be sure. You can still express your personality, and you can still express the fact that you are a good writer. But you know, you can do much more of that when you actually make it to the interview. So really nailing this is kind of, again, another hurdle that really helps you move on in the process. That's not a good sound. Okay, so this is just a reference to the statement of qualifications requirement. As you can see here, that's the third bullet down, statement of qualifications. Please include an SOQ that outlines your experience with X, Y, Z, and other things. And again, if I were to say something like this, I would highlight both process improvement, implementation, data collection, analysis of trends, problem solving, and creative solutions. I would give examples of each of those in my SOQ. All right, so once you submit your application and once you get called back for an interview, the interview itself can take a variety of different forms, and I've actually have a lot of trouble trying to characterize interviews to the extent that I have with the other steps of the process, because I mean, honestly, interviews in a lot of ways are interviews. They're individual to the particular agency. What you're trying to look for really depends on who you are and what you're trying to get out of your job, and it's really hard to to give best practices on interviews. And I think what I have is the next 3 minutes. I would definitely recommend, I would say there's no particular way to do a state interview, but there are best practices for interviews generally. The only thing that I would recommend is make sure you know your program, the program that you're applying to the best extent that you can. Whoever will be interviewing you is not going to expect you to have, you know, an insider's understanding, but they are going to want to see that you're interested. And so reading some of the more recent policy documents that they've put out, or some of their, you know, being aware of some of the most recent headlines that they got thrown into, just really being current with their work and trying to understand what they do and what you'd be doing to the best extent possible before you get in is really going to be key. So my final point in all this is really, you don't have, well, CivicSpark fellows are, actually, I don't, if you know anybody who wants a student job as well, there are plenty of opportunities for students to get involved before they graduate. So to close out, the timeline for application processing and the interview process really varies. And one of the more common questions that I get is like, once I apply, how long can I expect to hear back? And that is really difficult to say. It could be, you could get, the entire process could take a month. As it could also take, I've heard horror stories of about a year. The range is really, really wide. And so I would say expect about, and this is not, there's no data behind this particular number other than people that I've talked to, but about 10 applications per interview. And I would say give yourself about 3 to 4 months to really land a job within this process. So whatever that timeline, however that timeline fits with your timeline, I would say that's a good rule of thumb to follow. But with that, I just want to close and say that I've found this place being the public sector, to be an incredibly rewarding place to work. And it's given me opportunities to be a constant lifelong learner. I'm slapped in the face with new information every single day, and I absolutely love it. And it's really does help me feel like I'm making a difference, not necessarily in people's lives, but I'm helping to shape systems that do that do change the lives of Californians and California. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions and comments, and hope that was helpful. And I hope I get to hear a story about a CivicSpark fellow getting a job in the state or in county government.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to, I don't know if you have your mics, but you could also just say your questions, or you can chat them to us and then we can read them out loud. Yeah, you can see the chat. Oh, here it is. Let's see. Oh, someone asked if the exams are free to take.
Yeah, Oswaldo, they're online, and they're graded immediately.
Not all of them.
Not all of them are online, thank you. Generally speaking, the experiential exams are online. When it comes to reading and writing exams. Like my go-to example is Department of Finance, financial analyst position. They require you to come in, sit down, and take a math and writing exam. So a lot of the exams are online, not all of them are.
Any other questions? The survey that I sent out. Someone did ask, like, do you have any ideas what made you stand out as the ideal candidate for your current position?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Other than just kind of, I think being somebody who didn't have any experience, but being really passionate about getting it, helped me get into the fellowship program, the executive fellowship program. And I think that was also necessary. That background was also interesting to my applicants, or the people that I applied to as well when I was interviewing. Generally, I tend to be really passionate about what it is that I'm interested in. And so making sure that I convey that and finding jobs where I can be passionate really helped me out. So that there's both this kind of the social capital component, which is like, what is a fact that's interesting, that stands out generally speaking. It doesn't necessarily have to be a qualifying thing, but you can talk about that one time where you learned incredible life lessons working at a summer camp or something like that. Or, I mean, for me, some of the research I did, I was canoeing around looking at birds. That's something that's not, it humanizes you. And people are working with you every day, so that's really important. Another thing is I read up. I did my homework before I got into these interviews, and I made sure to do my homework before writing the SOQs as well, and before writing the applications, and catering every application to the person that I was applying to, I think really helps as well.
Okay, so one question is, are certain state positions really adamant about the amount of work experience and where you get that? Like, for example, 1 year of civil service work versus 3 years of progressively more responsibility.
Hmm.
And do you absolutely need 1 year of civil service before applying for these if you don't have it?
Sure. Thanks, Alan. I would say the experience question, if you can, well, before getting into kind of the numbers, I would say that if you can justify your experience as translatable, then I would say not everybody's going to accept that, but I think a lot of people would. If you were working in the private sector in something that didn't necessarily superficially seem completely relevant to the job, to the duty statements of the job you're applying to, but you have a really good reason as to why those former duties really do translate to this new job, I think that's something that people would find hard to ignore. Some people probably would ignore them. Every office, every agency is different, and every agency has different hiring practices, even though there is this common process. And so it really depends on who's hiring you. And honestly, if somebody isn't going to value your experience versus somebody who is, I mean, who would you rather work for? That said, there are some, I think there are some, I guess, conversion units with respect to experience. For example, the executive fellowship program was seen as kind of like a year of that was seen as 3 years of experience in certain job duties. I would imagine there's some kind of conversion unit for the CivicSpark program as well. Y'all are not coming in without experience, that is for sure. So really, when it comes down to it, I would really play up this program and really say what you did for it, and then use that translational narrative of the experience from this program to whatever job you're applying to.
Any other questions from other folks? I did have one question. So I think fellows right now, they have kind of 3 months left of their fellowship. So I guess, are there any skills or experiences that people should be focusing on if they want to prepare themselves for state positions?
Oh man, like I said, there's a ton of different state positions, and so there's no cheat sheet really in terms of, it's kind of goes back to the experience question. There's not a there's it does depend on where you want to go to work, but generally speaking, I would say there's not a list of specific activities that you need to do. I think one of the things that people generally highly value in terms of experience is if you have any sort of familiarity with the legislative process. I don't think that's always, it's not always, it's never really a deal breaker, but it helps. So if you're familiar with tracking bills, people kind of see you as cued into the overall process that is governing. And then if you really have followed policy implementation across multiple levels of the implementation, from policy to, let's say, like regulation development to stakeholder and public engagement to develop that regulation, to the writing of the regulation, to the passing of the regulation, to the implementation of the regulation, and then the continued coordinating that comes with that implementation. I think understanding the entire process is something that is useful for sure. But being curious about everything really does help, because you have the capacity to be really interdisciplinary in the state. And so really understanding how things connect, I think, helps a lot.
Thanks. Any other questions from the fellows? My list of questions. You want to maybe talk a little bit more about, I guess, NxtGov as an organization?
Absolutely.
How fellows can get involved, or if they're later working in the state, I guess how they could get involved.
Yeah. So if you're working for the state, and that includes state government and or local government, or you're just interested in how it all works and how the gears turn, NxtGov has a lot of opportunities to really plug in terms of structure, which is kind of the entry points for working with NxtGov. There's a membership program, ambassadors program, and then 3 committees. There's the public recruitment committee, which I'm very involved with. There's the community engagement committee, and then there's the professional development committee. The committees themselves are somewhat self-explanatory, except for public recruitment. Generally speaking, we're not trying to recruit people to NxtGov. We're trying to bring people into the state, both state and local government, which is what I am hoping to do today. And if you are interested in tackling some of the workforce issues that the state is going to be facing with a huge swell of retirees coming up, and in terms of the workforce needs itself within the state, we're always 10 years behind in tech, for example. That's one area that you can definitely just reach out to me, say I'm interested, and we'll work on incorporating you into one of our projects. Community engagement is a area where people go out and they engage with the community in a whole host of different volunteer ways. The idea there is, like, if we're a government for the people, we should be serving the people as directly as we can. And one of the more recent things they did was host something called, they worked with an organization called Project Birthday, where they hosted a joint birthday party for a lot of different kids who didn't have the funds to be able to really have their own birthday party. So they brought the balloons, brought the cupcakes, bought presents, and really just put on an event for these kids. Professional development is really all about skill building and helping you get better once you are in state service. My goal with professional development is to continuously siphon off those training positions to people who are outside of the state, so that people can be prepared before they get into state government. So that's an ongoing effort. But one of the things that they are doing right now, for example, is they are actually hosting an SOQ workshop in the very near future. The date escapes me, but it might actually be today. So if you're interested in, and there's another part to it too. So if you're interested in writing an SOQ or learning how to better write an SOQ, definitely plug in with that. And then those are the membership and ambassador programs have a lot of benefits as well. For the sake of time, I think the committees are the best 3 places to plug in to see whether or not you're really interested in NxtGov. And of course, we always have a happy hour at the end of the month at Bottle and Barlow. It's on R Street. in Midtown Sacramento. Definitely come by, check us out. No commitment. We'll, you know, it's one of the most interesting happy hours I've been to because everybody's, and I'm not just saying that, like I've had conversations with people from a bunch of different agencies that are somewhat unrelated, yet we're holding a conversation about a single topic, and it's really fun. So yeah, NxtGov has a lot of opportunity and a lot to offer.
I guess, are there any other questions from folks?
I do have, if there's, as a closer.
Sure.
So everyone else on the panel today has really, with respect to a background and how they got into state service, I think we all have had different pathways in terms of where we ended up. Ciaran is an executive fellow, Michael works in local government, and Ryan is an appointee, which goes through a slightly different process than this that I just described. So if you feel like you are interested in working in capacities that are similar to that, definitely ask them about their processes as well, because this is useful for a wide range of positions across state government, but it's not a cover. It doesn't cover everything.
Well, thank you. If there aren't any other questions, I guess we might just switch into our alumni panel. See if any more come in the last minute or so. Okay. Well, in that case, well, thank you, Seth, and maybe I can share your information after the webinar for folks if
that would be great.
If they have any other questions past this. Sharing this screen, can't really tell.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we'll move into our public service alumni panel. I'm not sure if Michael or Ryan are there, so we might just start with Ciaran if you want.
Sure.
Give an intro to
Scoot
yourself.
into the spot Seth just vacated.
And then we'll just go through with each person, and at the end kind of have a Q&A for any questions you may have.
Sure. So I was a CivicSpark fellow last year, and I was in the Bay Area cohort where I worked for the cities of Hayward and Dublin. And my projects were mainly focused on greenhouse gas inventories and other quantifying metrics. I loved my year of working in local government because I really felt like my work mattered. I had purpose. I felt fulfilled every day, but I did want to try my hand at state government because I was interested in some of the policy questions, like how are state policies implemented and created, because I really saw the effect that the state policies had on my city, specifically my more conservative city of Dublin, where change was really only happening from direction from the state. So I am now doing the Capital Fellows Program as an executive fellow, where I'm working at CalRecycle. And since I am more interested in environmental justice and climate policy than pure waste, I've been able to position myself to work on where climate and waste and waste and environmental justice intersect. So I'm working on a lithium-ion battery PV panel, recycling, end-of-life management working group, and white paper. Working on the SB 1383 formal rulemaking process, and these are regulations that will mandate organic waste diversion from landfills in order to reduce methane emissions. And then I'm also on the environmental justice interdepartmental team, and we're working on some best management practices for solid waste facilities, as well as community engagement. So CivicSpark helped me get to where I am by giving me concrete experiences in the public sector. Since, like Seth, I had a science background and had little policy or public sector experience. And it also just furthered my commitment to be a civil servant. This CivicSpark also gave me experience in the sustainability field, which was so different from the ES classes I took, and I was learning something new every single day, which I think is one of the reasons why I like these last two fellowships, as well as just the general field. I use the connections through CivicSpark alumni. I talked to multiple folks who are either CivicSpark alums or somehow connected to CivicSpark when applying not only to this fellowship, but also to staff positions at the Air Resources Board. It gave me the opportunity to go to conferences in the Bay Area and Sacramento and further develop my professional interests and networks. And then I was able to utilize the interview and resume tips through the regional trainings that you have either done or are upcoming. And I'm at CalRecycle because last year my mentor in Dublin gave me the opportunity to learn about and attend meetings on recycling and waste programs for the city, even though that was outside of the projects I was working on, outside of my experience, my wheelhouse, and it got me interested in realizing that there is this climate waste intersection. After both of these fellowships, I kind of thought like I would have a light bulb moment and say, I want to forever work in the state government or forever go back to local or regional government. And it is definitely not as cut as dry as I want or expected. And there are trade-offs, pros and cons to both. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about those. And we can process those together, since these are questions I constantly like to talk about as I verbally process, as well as anyone interested in working for the state or in the Capital Fellowship. I have a few pieces of advice for you today. If you're interested in state service, especially a specific department or agency, try to talk to people who already work there. Like if you're in Sacramento for a conference or graduation, ask to have coffee with someone, or if you're remote, try a phone and informational meeting. They were really helpful in trying to figure out the work culture of specific agencies, as well as what you actually would be doing in that job. For example, Ryan is at SGC and CalRecycle. They're such different organizations with different work types and work cultures, and that's not something that you would be able to figure out from just looking from the outside and applying. And utilize your CivicSpark network. There are CivicSpark folks at SGC, ARB, Caltrans, and others. And I am happy to connect you with non-CivicSpark related people who work in other agencies as well. So reach out to us. Use LinkedIn or ask your RC to find these connections. And I found that most people want to help young professionals, and first of all, they want to share their story. Like I am sharing my story now, but also they are where they are now because someone else helped them, and we want to pass it down. And then in state government, some folks will know about the CivicSpark program, but not everyone will. I think in local government sustainability, it's more well known. So talk up your AmeriCorps aspect, because everyone can understand that, and talk about your local government experience, because there's a lot of folks who go back and forth between state and local government, and it's definitely seen as advantageous, because one of the things that is always discussed is wanting to further the collaboration and the relationships between local and state governments, and you have an inside look on that, and that's something you can bring to a state government job. That's all I have as my introduction, but.
Thanks, Ciaran. That was really great. I think Michael's there, right? Is Michael ready?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear
Can you
you.
hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yeah. Sorry I don't have the video chats. A little bit laggy when I use it, but yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Michael Consunji, and I am a Vision Zero Analyst, SF Fellow for the SF Municipal Transportation Agency. I was a 2017 to 2018 Climate Fellow working for the City of Santa Monica's Office of Sustainability and the Environment. And with that work, with my service year, I really worked on with a variety of projects and programs, mainly working on implementing the EV Action Plan, starting and implementing the city's first multifamily electric vehicle electric rebate program, working on some analysis for the climate action and adaptation 2-year update, and also doing event planning and outreach. With that, I really solidified my interest in local government, seeing how much of an agent of change I could be in the communities that I would serve as a public servant. So I really wanted to continue on this route. So talking to my network about opportunities to keep on professional or developing professionally, attending as many conferences, doing as many informational interviews as possible, just to broaden my network and skills and really make those meaningful connections. And yeah, I spent the past year working with the SF Fellows program, similar program to CivicSpark in terms of structure, how there's reoccurring professional development trainings, mentorship, supervisor structure. And with that, I've really learned even more about local government, working with different teams, with different project managers, adjusting to the different work cultures, norms, really allowed me, I think, to be flexible, whether it be working individually or working in a group. And the different types of projects that I'm involved with really allow me to explore different interests within transportation planning. So I'm doing work with the Vision Zero team on bike and ped safety projects and streetscape projects. I'm working with the Office of Innovation on policy and planning on emerging mobilities and technologies. And with the Livable Streets Analytics team, I've been doing a lot of staff labor analysis, staff utilization and project delivery. And on top of that, I've also worked with our grants and capital finance team, working on doing some grants such as affordable housing and sustainable communities, TFCA, Prop AA. So I think with that, it's been a great experience working in a small space like Santa Monica, then moving to such a large agency as the SFMTA. So I think gaining that perspective on small and large agencies really allows me to be ready for whatever opportunities arise, whether that be continuing in the public sector or the private or nonprofit sector.
Thanks, Michael. That's really great. Ryan, are you on the line?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Ryan Silber. I was a climate fellow in the years 2017, 18, I want to say, but I think Michael said that and we weren't in the same cohort, so I'm not sure that's right. Maybe it's 2016, 17, that sounds better. But I was at the San Luis Obispo Air Pollution Control District, which did a lot of the regional planning for San Luis Obispo County on climate adaptation. So I worked on creating a regional adaptation plan for the county, as well as working on a residential energy retrofit protocol for the California Air Pollution Control Officers greenhouse gas credit exchange. And I also got involved in some smart growth planning evaluation for developments occurring within San Luis Obispo County. The reason I was able to get involved in so many different things was because I really was, for one, empowered by my office at the Air District to pursue my interests, but I think really taking advantage of having that, I guess, sort of loosely defined work space. I work some longer hours there to take advantage of that, but your office ideally will view you as a flexible resource where they're paying very little for some advanced work that normally wouldn't be expected of someone or individuals that are age and experience. For us to get a foot in the door in this work, I think is a pretty special thing the CivicSpark program offers, but to be able to then blossom beyond what your normal scope of work is, I think that should be an opportunity that you all try to take the most advantage of. I spent a lot of my time reading different research and planning documents in fields I was interested in: climate adaptation, smart growth, which I think definitely lended to my professional development. But some things as you all wind down with your service term to keep in mind is definitely enhance your network within CivicSpark. You're all exceptional individuals just by the nature of being within the program, but you'll continue to be within the same professional circles. So get to know the work you all are each doing. And beyond that, just talking about the issues definitely will expand your views on them. But also take the time to go speak with other individuals you interact with in the environmental professional field. If you see someone doing work you're interested in or in a role that you think you might be interested in, just go and talk with them. Informational interviews. You can identify opportunities for growth, maybe even identify future positions, or just thinking about your own future and what you want to be working in. I don't come from a background in environmental planning or urban planning. I studied economics in school. Honestly, the CivicSpark program was my first foray into planning. I wish I'd known about it earlier. I may have studied it in school, but there's so much opportunity to learn in that field, and it's changing so quickly in terms of what older environmentalism and planning look like into now divisional type approach of thinking about all these issues like economics, housing, transportation, health, all as a single issue, climate change underlying all of that, and how we think about what our cities in the future want to look like. So, on that little tangent, I can get into how I ended up where I am today at the Strategic Growth Council. We are an interagency council comprised of 6 secretaries at the state level, including the Office of Planning and Research, Environmental Protection Agency, Natural Resources, 3 others, as well as 3 public members appointed by the governor, the Senate Pro Tem, and this House Speaker or Assembly Speaker. So, but our objective is to coordinate across state agencies as well as make connections to local governments and state agencies, all along the lines of enhancing equitable or smart growth for all of California. So a couple of the programs we run are the Technical Assistance Program, which helps local jurisdictions apply for state funding, particularly climate change investment funds, which are funded through cap and trade. We have the Transformative Climate Communities Program, which does community scale investments driven by community-based organizations. Climate Change Research Program. We have the Health in All Policies group, and we also have the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program, which is the program I manage, which is also a cap and trade funded program that makes neighborhood scale investments in affordable housing and transportation infrastructure in order to increase community connectivity and reduce vehicle miles traveled, while providing opportunity for the residents living in the area. In my role, I coordinate across a couple different agencies, including our main partners in Housing and Community Development and the Air Resources Board, to really operate the program and make sure it runs smoothly from guidelines development through the solicitation period, through their grant review, into awards, and finally implementation. But this is, the way I found myself in this role is I really, I kind of perfectly met those interests that I described earlier that I developed through the CivicSpark program and thinking about equitable growth and the opportunities it can provide for California. But it definitely helps that I got into a chance to interview for a related position at the Office of Planning and Research through connections I made at CivicSpark. So, as I definitely did not buy into the importance of professional networks in the past, but you all definitely should be out there talking to people. It'll definitely make a difference in opportunities that you'll get access to, which is in a sense unfortunate. We should live in more of a merit-based society, but don't let that stop you all. You're all extremely capable. You just need to go out there and talk to the right people. But just one final plug for SGC. I think you all may have seen it in the listservs going around, but we're hiring 2 positions for our Transformative Climate Communities program. So take a look at that. I think the application ends tomorrow night.
Thank you, Ryan.
Mhm.
I think before we open up for Q&A for the fellows, I was just going to ask, I think, 2 or 3 questions for you all, if you maybe want to share. But I guess, what was the biggest changes in like your work or professional experience, kind of going from the CivicSpark program to the positions that you're working at now? I don't know who wants to start.
I can start. So this is Ciaran. I think one of the biggest changes is that last year I worked on really quantitative projects. That's what my background is in science, and that was kind of how I got into the CivicSpark program, was talking that up and finding a placement in projects that I could really utilize those. And this year I was looking for something where I could expand and work on different skill areas, be more policy legislative focused or community engagement and presentations focused. So just like the content of the work has been different. And I have to say, I really miss Excel spreadsheets. And when I am looking for a job in the future, I think I am gonna try to find that space where I can use both quantitative and qualitative skills.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest.
Is Ryan still talking?
Hello?
I think you got cut off a bit.
Oh, sure. I'll try that again. Yeah. For me, the biggest change was moving from regional to state government on policies that, affected from a 270,000 person county to a 40 million person state. So thinking about, the relationship between one size fits all versus context sensitive solutions, moving to that bigger scale is definitely very exciting. The range of impact increases in some ways. So getting used to that, as opposed to at a more local level, seeing the people that you're working with on a more granular level, that was a big change. But also the policy atmosphere too, of anyone who's thinking about working in Sacramento. It's definitely a change in getting used to, I guess, the politics around things, starting thinking about agency relationships and then new legislation coming in. So that was also a big change to get used to.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, I can speak to that too. My time at CivicSpark in Santa Monica was I was involved with a lot of program administration and implementation, creating the EV rebate program, creating best practice materials for charging, and energy and water conservation was the bulk of my work. In San Francisco, it really it's different in the sense that I'm doing a little bit more planning and policy work, working on less program administration and more policy research and development, working on transportation planning. So using a little bit more, using more softwares like GIS, AutoCAD, and the Adobe software suite has really been a big change in the scope of my work. In terms of just the space that I'm working in Santa Monica, I was in a team of 15 at our office. So going from a weekly or a biweekly staff meeting of 15 to a biweekly staff meeting at the SFMTA of 50 or more really is a big change. So trying to navigate the space, working with the different bureaucratic red tape and interdepartmental divisional politics really was a pretty big adjustment that I needed to make. But in the end, each has their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think that having the taste or dipping your toes into both types of office environments is really good, especially early on. So you could decide which type of environment you want to be involved with if you do decide to work in the public sector.
Great. And I think just maybe one more question from me. I guess, what do you enjoy most about the work that you're currently doing? In order.
Sure. I think very, very similar to my time at CivicSpark. I go home every day knowing that my work is making a difference. It's very meaningful. I know I'm having an impact. And as Ryan touched on it, the scale of it is very different being at the state, since the regulations I'm working on are going to impact across the state, which is pretty monumental. And yeah, I think, and then also knowing that I know, like, you can make change through advocacy and through nonprofit work, but I really value being having the opportunity to actually sit at the decision-making table and being part of those conversations and trying to be an agent of change from within the system that isn't perfect and not equitable entirely, and like trying to move it in that direction while being at the table. Great.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
You can go. Okay. Sorry about that. I think my favorite part about working at the SFMTA, and also this goes well with my time at Santa Monica and CivicSpark, is just the people I work with. It's really a rewarding experience working with these dedicated civil servants that come in every day with a upbeat attitude, despite whether the climate around the agency isn't the best, or if there's some issues that really we need to address. So I think just seeing the passion and the resiliency of my coworkers, my supervisor, is really inspiring, and really makes me want to continue the work being done at the city and county or wherever else I may work with. The people that I work with, especially my supervisor, also is very flexible on what I get to work on. So I have the autonomy to work on a wide variety of projects with a variety of teams and divisions that allow me to continue working on different types of projects and tasks that really expand my skill sets, whether that be technical or soft skill sets. Then I think the last thing that I really enjoy about my job is just how much responsibility and accountability that the agency places on me. So I feel that my voice is heard. I'm able to speak up about different strategies and best management practices. So I think being at this space where I'm only 2 years removed from college, but still having an impactful voice within the agency that employs 6,000 and serves the city and county of San Francisco is really empowering, and it really gets me out of bed and inspires me to do the work that I do the best that I could.
Yeah, I don't know that I could really say it much better than those other two explanations is given. I mean, it's a combination of all those three. On the day-to-day, having great coworkers makes a really positive work environment to come into. But when things are really getting tough, realizing the impacts of the work we're doing is special. And at the policy level, it can sometimes feel removed. But next Monday, I'm going to a groundbreaking for one of our affordable housing projects, and I'm really looking forward to that and making the connection between all these tough interagency meetings, pressure from stakeholders, timeline crunches, to actually seeing what this all amounts to and seeing people, residents, will now have a safe, stable living situation. That's a big impact of all these people I work with, and seeing what we can collectively do. I think that's really what keeps me in it.
Thanks, Ryan. And I guess just to open up Q&A to the fellows. So if anyone wants to chat any questions that you all have, or if you want to say it in the mic, you can do that as well. Okay. Yes, first question. What's the best way to include both CivicSpark and the site when describing your job titles, address, contact info in your resumes and applications?
Yeah, I did both CivicSpark and AmeriCorps and my site specific locations. I think it was like CivicSpark, AmeriCorps CivicSpark Climate Action Fellow, and then I have like a separate line for location, San Luis Obispo Air Pollution Control District. So I think that really hits on name recognition of CivicSpark, but greater so for those who don't recognize it, AmeriCorps, but then giving more context to where you actually worked. And then I think what's going to be more important is you all describing what specifically you did, any outcomes, or, and obviously describing your position changes according to what position you're applying to. But touch on the pieces that especially deliverables, but part of the work you actually did. I think that's the most important.
That's the exact approach I took as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing you can do is like keep it kind of minimal when it comes to like your resume in terms of describing what exactly CivicSpark is and other stuff, but kind of expanding on that like in your cover letter or in LinkedIn, which you can just put as much as you want in there.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I just put CivicSpark Climate Fellow. Then the second line was City of Santa Monica Office Sustainability. Then from there, you can just do your day-to-day tasks and your final deliverables.
And I think a question for Ryan. I guess, do positions at Strategic Growth Council require an exam?
They do not. We are technically governor's appointees. I haven't had an opportunity to meet either of the two governors I've served under, but as part of that, we do not have to apply according to technical classifications, which other public service jobs, you have to very strictly meet all of the classifications. So there's no exam for us or other exempt positions as well. And that's the key. If the title is an exempt position.
And then another question from Kaylee. Did you find your jobs through CalCareer? This doesn't count for both of you.
Yeah, so mine is a fellowship. So no, it was not on CalCareers. It was a separate process. But I did apply to a few jobs at ARB, and all of that I did through CalCareers and followed the process that Seth outlined earlier.
For my job, same with Ciaran, it was a fellowship, but you apply through the SF, the city and county of SF's website. So that's how I found it. And also Kristen Wraithwall told me about the position. So that really got me interested in the program. But any job with the city and county of San Francisco, you have to go to their website. It's fairly the same process. You have to find the classification. You fill out a master application, and the tips that Seth gave were pretty much spot on with what you would have to do in San Francisco. You have to make sure that you hit all the keywords and the position requirements and descriptions, and make sure that you tailor your resume and cover letter to hit those keywords and phrases that will get you through that hurdle and move you on to the interview process. And from there, you can really change it up and add a little bit flair, or make it less mundane than you would for the computer screening software portion of the application process.
Yeah, my position, I think I mentioned I heard about it originally through a contact who reached out to me, asked to apply, which I made through the CivicSpark network. But I think this loops all the way back around to taking full advantage of the opportunities you're given. I hardly knew this person at all, but they were a big proponent of the CivicSpark program, and we happened to be at one event where I was sitting there nervously listening along in my CivicSpark role, surrounded by a bunch of people who had much more experience than me, had had been working on the topics that we were discussing for a long time. But, I had been reading a lot, and I was trying to gain my confidence while there was an open comment period. I finally decided to stand up and say something after I ran it through my head for like 5 minutes straight. And the one person who happened to be in the audience liked what I had to say and then reached out because of it. So I think it's just an example of take advantage of the opportunities you're given, and don't be afraid to speak out if you have something worth saying.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Does anyone have any other questions? So, speakers? Yeah, I feel like I kind of asked this question to Seth earlier, but I don't know if your answers would be a little bit different. But I guess what kind of skills or traits do you think are most important for working in local or state government positions? And then maybe an explanation.
Yeah, I think clear communication skills are really important. If you're going to be working in a team with people, and not just, the only positions that don't require teamwork are like very research intensive roles. So, this is pretty widely applicable. You need to be able to clearly communicate, because no one wants to work with someone who is basically an isolationist. So, getting along with others and clear communication is the key to teamwork, which underlies most of government work. Also, thinking about time management and project management skills, being able to display that you're able to work on complex issues, or show how you're able to map things out and adapt to changes, just showing that you can take a task and run with it and reach the finish line.
And to build on that writing and analytical skills are just necessary for whatever jobs you're applying to, not just state service or local governments, but they're pretty key. And I think you all have great ones because you are CivicSpark fellows, and they choose great fellows. And then specifically when applying to state level jobs, try to get an understanding of the policy landscape, like what agencies or departments work in this realm and how do they interact. And you're not an insider, so you won't know exactly everything, but you can kind of figure out like who's the regulatory body, or who has to approve these plans, or how those dynamics work as kind of your preparation for your interview. As Seth said, like be well read, understand the agency that you are applying for, and want to be a job.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly jump in on that and second that with a lot of emphasis. These are all public positions, so the work that's being done is mostly publicly available. So if you can identify where and what section you'll be working in, try to see exactly what work they produce and do through their public websites. And if you can, talk to someone who works within that area as well.
Yeah, I would say all those tips and advice are all spot on. I think for me, the biggest skills that I felt I needed to work in this space were definitely communication, whether that be written or verbal. So when you write policy memos, writing a typical email, or doing some research analysis and explaining your findings is super important. Written or communication, and with verbal, anything that comes to presenting in front of 1 to 50 people is very important. To be comfortable with speaking in public speaking. I think being able to have that customer service skills is important for every public servant. So when you go out into the field, you do community engagement events, it's very important to be to be well versed in how to speak to the public, making sure that you're calm and composed, or respectful of everyone, and you try to get as much input and feedback in an accessible and equitable way is, I think, one of the more important skills that are needed in the planning and policy and public sector field.
Thanks, Michael. I think maybe just one more question from me. So I think we kind of already talked a lot about, what you guys enjoy about the work that you do, but I guess what are some things that people need to kind of are okay with doing or be able to tolerate, like working on when they're working in the public sector?
So I can jump in there. It is bureaucratic and there can be longer time scales to make change than you want, especially entering this field and having big ideas and seeing those big ideas come like being proposed. It may take years for them to come to fruition. And so being able to be okay with that time lag and bureaucracy, and having patience, and also like there's a lot of politics involved, both amongst the different agencies, and then amongst like with the legislature and the governor's office, and that can either divert or get into the way of some of the work you're doing, and knowing that that's part of this process. And I had one other thing, but I didn't write it down, so I forgot it.
That's all right. Michael or Ryan?
Yeah, I would definitely say be ready to encounter bureaucratic holdups. Things tend to take a little bit longer than some young, enthusiastic people who want to make change in government would like to think. So be prepared for that, but also, if you end up in a public service job, don't be afraid to keep pushing for change. Realize the bounds of what can be accomplished, but keep trying to push those bounds. That's something that will vary based on the position you're in and how much you can be able to really change an old institution versus a new one. So keep fighting the good fight. Also, something that I encountered was just be ready for, I guess, more administerial type work. I come from more of a research background, so a lot of what I do in the day-to-day is process improvement and ensuring things continue on smoothly as they are. So that was a big change for me, a lot of scheduling and meetings. So be prepared for that. But if you end up doing things that aren't the sexiest in your mind, then make sure you build in time to do those things that you really still love to do. For me, that would be more of the research and the guidelines improvements, and working with others to improve the things they're working on and making a collaborative atmosphere. So make sure you find balance.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges that I've experienced have been mentioned already. So like bureaucracy and interdepartmental or divisional politics. So I think finding out, talking to the people in the know about those standards, those norms, and really ingraining that in your work so that you navigate the space efficiently and effectively is important. For example, I think with my work with the Office of Innovation, I was making recommendations on augmenting the transit-only lane enforcement program, curb management practices, and Vision Zero strategies. So in my research and recommendations, I had to be very careful with the tone of my recommendations, the tone in which I talk about some of my data in regards to TNCs, curb management practices. So getting to know that through talking with your supervisor, making sure you're constantly checking in, asking for advice and tips, it really goes a long way so that you don't have to go through that challenge of completing your project and having it reviewed and needing it to be changed in changing the structure or the tone of the entire project just because you didn't really know that what politics or bureaucracy you would encounter along the way. So making sure you go with your supervisor or those in the know of how to navigate the office space in terms of your project is, I think, one of the biggest tips I can give.
Thanks, Michael. I think that's all the questions from me. So just want to put one more ask there if anyone has any other questions that they have for the speakers. You want to share that now? I think that's about it if no one has any other questions. I don't know if you all have any last words you want to say to the fellows before we wrap up.
You know, as you all approach the end of your service, just want to encourage you all to stay positive in your job searching. If it doesn't go the way that you want it to go at first, I've experienced some pretty brutal job application periods. So just stick with it and keep pursuing what it is you want to do.
That's right.
And I'm happy to be a resource if you're ever in Sacramento or want to have a remote phone conversation. Yeah, I'm open.
Yeah, I just want to commend all of you for, I think this is a great first step in figuring out whether you want to continue with the public sector or move on to different fields. So this is the right first step. And I think now I implore you to talk to your network, attend as many conferences, workshops, and hold as many informational interviews with people that you want to get to know better and to add to your network. I think just looking up on LinkedIn or talking to people you know about reaching out to them and seeing how did they get there, what advice would they want to give you, and any resources that they could give you to get your foot in the door is super important. I think everyone here got to where they are just through networking and a little bit of luck and just help from other people. So reach out to your network and support system and it'll all work out.
Thank you, Mike.
And good luck with the service year.
So I think that's about a wrap for our webinar. So thank you so much to our speakers for spending their time to do this and for a question from Mike Crowell. But there will be a copy of this for anyone who's I maybe found this from NxtGov just on their website, and for all the fellows that are joining, we'll be sharing this out later on, and then I think any other resources that we have related to applying for state positions, we'll be sharing that as well. But thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.